Hello, everybody. Thank you for reading the screen and turning off your mics and your cameras. Really appreciate you doing that. And also thank you for those people who have found the chat function. And if you haven't already, great if you can put your name in the chat function, where you currently are in the world, and the age group you coach. That would be great for us to see who's tuning in. Where and the age groups that they coach. So we really appreciate you doing that. So welcome. My name's Gareth Long, and I'd like to welcome everybody to the Australian College of Physical Education and our first of our weekly Monday night coaches club webinar. We've got coaches joining us from all four corners of the world. So I realise whilst for us in Australia it is getting into Monday night, I appreciate that while people in Australia may be having a cold beer, there are people around the world having their morning cup of tea or afternoon coffee. But wherever you're joining us from, welcome, and we really thank you for joining us. Before we start and before I introduce our panel, I'd like to introduce the other people who are behind this webinar. In fact, I'll introduce two of them because one of them is on the panel, so I will introduce Warren later. But firstly, I'd like to introduce Chris Adams. How are you going, Chris?
Very well, Gareth, very well. Hope everyone's well wherever you're listening.
Thanks, Chris. And Chris will be joining me as the co-host as we go through. And my other friend, colleague, I'd like to introduce Drew Taylor. Hey, Drew.
Evening / morning all. Gareth,
how's it going?
Good to be with you. Very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Not too bad at all. So as I said, this is the first of hopefully many, but I thought it's worth us giving a little bit of time of what we hope to achieve through these webinars. It's a strange time for everybody around the world, and it's mainly strange for most of us, probably because we're not coaching at the moment, or we're not coaching in the way that we're used to coaching. But what it perhaps does do, which is quite rare, is it gives us a bit of time to reflect and think about our own philosophy and our own practice. So hopefully events like this are really useful for us. Now, we've got three main aims that we want to, or three outcomes that we want to achieve from the Monday Night Coaches Club. One, that you learn from what others are doing. You know, we've selected excellent people from around the football world for our panel. So there's definitely things that we will all learn from our panel members. So that's number one, that we all learn what others are doing. Number two, just as important, is that we share and consider our own current practice. This isn't just going to be a listening experience. There's going to be a bit of that, but it is also, we've designed these so that everybody can talk and everybody can share good practice with each other. And the third one, those two are compulsory. You have to learn something, and you have to share. The third one might happen for some of us. It might be that what you learn influences you to change something and try something when we all get coaching again. So they're the main purpose of the Monday Night Coaches Club. So we've kind of set this up almost like a sort of chat show approach. So there's not going to be presentations as such, but I'm going to with Chris and Drew, we're going to lead a discussion with the coaches, probably for we'll see how we go, but maybe about 30 minutes. Where we talk to Owen, Ben and Warren, and then we plan to put you guys into what we call breakout rooms, where you can discuss things yourself, and then we'll come back for more questions with the panel. So that's our approach. Each week we're going to explore a different coaching theme. Today's discussion is going to be broadly based around session design. What informs what and how we plan? What are some of the principles behind our session design? And I suppose if someone observed our sessions over time, what would they typically see? So that's where we're going. I think it's now time to introduce our panel for today. It gives me great honour to introduce our first panel. We've definitely set the bar very high for our first one, so we've got a lot to live up to in our subsequent ones. And we're very grateful for members of the panel and being happy to appear on the unknown, as this is our first episode. So we're really grateful to particularly Ben and Owen. Warren had to be here, but we're particularly grateful to Ben and Owen for for joining us. So firstly, coming from somewhere in New Zealand, we have Owen Prosser, who is not only the head of high performance and education at the Oceania Football Confederation, but also the assistant coach for the Football Ferns, which is the national women's team of New Zealand. Welcome, Owen, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to get the invite from you, and looking forward to the next couple of hours.
Thank you. Secondly, coming somewhere from the UK, welcome to Ben Bartlett, who is the head of academy coaching at Fulham FC, an experienced coach educator from his previous employment with the English Football Association. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Gareth. Morning all. Good to see lots of friendly and familiar names down the participants. So yeah, looking forward to it. Similar to Owen. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but definitely not least, our own Warren Grieve, who is somewhere in New South Wales, Australia. Warren will be known to a lot of our Australian participants as an advanced coach educator, and increasingly known as one of the presenters of the In the Technical Area podcast. And that is the first of 3 plugs for the podcast that we're allowing today. And Warren is also one of the team for the Monday Night Coaches Club. Hey, Warren, how you going, mate?
Very well, thank you. As you said, have to be here tonight, but incredibly pleased to be so, and looking forward to the next, not just tonight, but the ones that are coming up in the future as well. So thanks for having me.
No problem. Thank you very much, guys. Before we get into the topic of session design and we get into the nitty-gritty of that, I thought I've kind of got a warm-up question, and it's a bit selfish because it's a question I'm particularly interested in the answer to. And it's a question for all of you, but I'll go to you first, Owen, if that's okay. I'd love you to sort of share an outline, what a typical football day looks like for you. Now, maybe not a day in the last couple, month or so, but before that, what would be a typical football day for you, Owen?
So I'm in the privileged position of having two jobs in football. So I have my one 9 to 5, if you want to call it that, full-time position, working with education and high performance across 11 countries in the Pacific region. So I'll kind of try and support those countries to put education programs and high performance player development programs in place to try and make sure that we've got as many coaches and as many players involved for as long as possible in as good a environment as possible. And then my part-time role is supporting the coaching staff at the Football Ferns. So capacity as assistant coach. So slightly different if you're involved in, if you're a club coach where you get regular contact with the players. We get really concentrated periods of activity across 2 or 3 weeks, but there might be 2 or 3 months between meals. So a lot of the coaching work that I do day to day will be involved in coach education and a lot of distance work with our Football Ferns, because we're fortunate enough that they're playing across the world, in Europe and the States, and it's about how we connect. So some of the methods that are being used over the past month, for example, are the way in which we'll work with a number of our international players that are around the world. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question clearly.
Well, it's a difficult question, so I imagine there isn't a typical day, is there at all, Owen? But no, thank you. That gives us a good insight into your dual roles. Thank you very much. And Ben, same question for you, please.
Yeah, I guess every day is probably a commitment to what the club have stated is important. So Fulham has a vision which talks about individuals fulfilling their potential. And I guess within that, there's the player development and the coach development piece, which as much as possible we try and see as reciprocal, so that what the coaches are getting better at is the same thing as what the players are getting better at, and vice versa, so that you haven't got a separation of a coach pursuing something that doesn't really align with the perceived needs of the players. And I guess every single day it's working with coaches, whether they're the under 18 or the under 23 coach, or whether they're a part-time under 9 coach, just best as possible with the resource and the time that they've got at their disposal to better commit to that. So I guess it's pursue that vision, and we've got 3 stated values, which are what we call the 3 H's: honesty, hard work, and humility. So pursue the vision, don't sacrifice the values in pursuit of it.
Thank you, Ben. Appreciate that. And Warren, same for you. What's a typical day in football look like for you?
Yeah, not too dissimilar to the two gents before, in the fact that go across both player development and coach development. We certainly see it here as one is not more important than the other, and they both play huge emphasis on our two strategic spearheads. So my day, it can be very, very different depending on whether I'm actually sat in the player development space and working as part of identifying potential, working with potential, developing potential, and that's on the player side. But then likewise going across in the coach development space, working with coaches, whether that be on formal coaching courses, advanced coaching courses, CB, A licenses, and that would be with FFA in that space, Football Federation Australia. So depending on what we have going on as part of our calendar, my day can look very different, but certainly going across player development and coach development would be the two sort of strategic spearheads where I would sit in working on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Warren. No, thank you, guys. It gives us a good insight into what your roles are, and I think it's important for us to understand that before we get into the detail on the session design, which we'll do now. And again, I'll probably stick with the same order if that's okay. So back to you, really, Owen. As assistant coach for the Football Ferns, I wonder if you can give us an insight into the approach to session design that the national team adopts, and maybe even what a typical session looks like.
Yeah, so I'm not sure whether we would have anything that is a standard typical practice. So there's not a format that we have where one session moves to the next, moves to another activity. But what I could kind of share is we do have an overall process to that design of how the players will learn when they're part of one of our tours. So we have multiple players coming in for a confined short period of time when we need to try and maximize the messages that we're sending across. So there might be pre-tour videos that we share with them, might be pre-training meetings. We obviously have the on-the-pitch stuff. There might be unit meetings around a Subbuteo board, which are back in ever since my childhood. They're back in now. But what I can share, so there's a number of ways in which we'll look to support player learning. And what we've gathered over time is evidence to suggest that players will pick different information up in very different ways. So one of the things I can share is some of the stuff that you'll be able to observe, some of the principles that we hold dear to us when we design a practice, but also when we reflect on them as well. So within our practice design, if you were to watch the Ferns play, you hopefully would see a demonstration of the values that we hold dear to us. So who are we and who do we try to be? So the 4 core values that we have within the Football Ferns, hopefully you'll see evident not only in terms of the practice and the behaviours that the players that demonstrate, but also the way in which the staff operate within that practice and the way in which they communicate some of the messages. So it's a constant reinforcement about who we are and who we're aspiring to be. Another one is around the session design has to be down the specific end. So there's very few general practices that we will run. So general possession practices, we don't necessarily do a great deal of. And the reason is we might have two practices before playing the USA in front of 50,000 people. So we need to make sure that we maximize our time with the players, and we need to make sure that everything that we do is relevant to the game and the opponents that they're about to play. Another principle that we have is more of us and less of them. So 80% of our practice design will be about us. It'll be around our playing philosophy and our playing model and what we believe is the way in which football should be played. And then 20% will be adapting that way based around some of the strengths or opportunities to exploit the opposition that we've observed. So one of the reasons why we focus on us is, again, because players are in their club environment. We'll have 23 players potentially playing in 23 different clubs, having 23 different coaches and 23 different playing styles. So we need that opportunity for us to reconnect as a group and really understand, firstly, our core values, but then how we play as well. Once we, if we have an 80% focus on us during the practice, that allows us to do that. The next thing you observe is around, we plan and design practices so that there's an opportunity for players to check for understanding, but also challenge on the messages that we're getting across. So we'll build those into the practice in a number of different ways. We have players within our squad that have 100 to 150 caps, which is 100 to 150 more than I've ever got. So we welcome the opportunity for them to bring their knowledge to the table, and sometimes agree as a group to go in a different direction to what we may have been heading. Or it might be an opportunity to reinforce some of the learnings and some of the key messages that we've been trying to get across.
Yeah,
and then the last thing I'll kind of cover, sorry Gareth, the last thing I'll kind of cover is, because we have limited amount of time with those players, we need to have every single moment utilized as much as possible. And I'll touch on this when I speak a little bit later. But you will have staff members operating outside of their remit. So we will have fully qualified doctors with our squad who are collecting the balls to ensure that they're in the right place for the next start of the next practice. We'll have staff doing everything that we can to set up the next practice, dealing out the bibs, so that the technical team can surround the players and support the learning. Make sure that we check for understanding during the drinks break. Make sure that we're clear on the outcomes that we want from the activity as a whole. So there's a couple of operational things and a couple of principal things that are key to us and who we are and what we believe to be true, but also it's heavily influenced by the design of the practice.
Yeah, thanks, Owen. A good example of how session design is, session structure and the logistics around it is influenced by your particular context. And I think that's certainly a principle that we will all be able to take away from that. Thank you. Ben, I sent the coaches some pre-reading, and I'm sure they've all read the article, so maybe we don't need to go over it in massive detail, but I really like that article where you outline your 6 steps for designing effective practice. And I wondered if it was, this is a difficult question in terms of the time, but I wonder if you're able to give us an example of that process, of that 6 steps.
Yeah, I guess if you send it out to people, then that's probably been really good for those that are suffering with insomnia at this time of year. Yeah, I guess similar to sort of what Owen spoke about. I guess the fundamental idea of setting up experiences to affect learning, and I guess probably need to have some kind of understanding about what we perceive learning to be before we decide to practice in any given way. So in our environment, we've determined that learning is an adaptation to experience. So I guess as a consequence, we probably need to think about what experiences we want them to expose them to affect the necessary adaptation. And I guess the adaptation we want is to probably be able to play football in a way that Fulham determines is important. So as a consequence, we have what we would call 5 moments of the game, which are controlling possession, intelligent defending, creating and converting chances, transitions, both from having it to not having it and from not having it to having it, and then set plays. And I guess the language that we've tried to use about moments just implies that they are moments. They come and they go. You have possession for 15 seconds and then you don't have it. And the idea that you might spend 90 minutes practicing only controlling possession, when even if you have the ball for 70% of the game, you don't have it for 90 minutes solely, is perhaps trying to flex some of the way that we might think about experience design. And one of the things we challenge our coaches to do is to try and ensure that there is more than one thing going on at the same time, so that they're moments of the game. And even though we might be focusing or heightening attention towards controlling possession, there'll still be a way that we structure it to ensure that the intelligent defending is representative of the way that we might want it to look when they're playing genuine football. So I guess a specific example of that would be we encourage our coaches to decide on the sort of broad style of play linked to the individuals that are in their care, and then to try and ensure that any experience that the player's exposed to combines the kind of Fulham framework, outline, broad territory, if you like, of the things that the club thinks important, but stitches into that the specific needs of the individual players. So some of our sides this year have flexed playing with a back 3. Some have played with a more traditional back 4. And I guess we try to ensure that practice has a reflection of the different systems that we try to play. So if we had, I don't know, say 19 players, we might have one team that's reflecting the 3-4-3. So they might have 1 goalkeeper, the central 3 defenders, 2 midfielders and the 3 forwards. So there's 9 players. Your back 3 are organised as your back 3 would probably look in a normal game of 11v11. 2 of the diamond or box midfield, and then the front 3. If you had an opposite team going back the other way, because you've got 19, they might have 10 players. They might be playing with a representation of 4-3-3, for example, and they may play with a back 3, which represents a central defender and the 2 fullbacks, the 3 central midfielders and the 3 forwards, so effectively a 3-3-3. So the design of the practice is representing the systems that you might want to take place. Second thing that we would then probably look at is the way in which we, I guess, constrain or challenge the teams based upon the broad ideas of the way that we want to play. So the team that are playing the 3-3-3, for example, naturally got an extra player. They might have a broader focus around controlling possession. So we may challenge them to say the amount of goals that you score is equivalent to the number of passes that you've made in the opposition's half. So it says get the ball into the opposition's half, control and dominate possession in their half. So if you get to 5 passes in the opposition's half and score, you'll be rewarded with 5 goals. So it suggests get out the pitch, plan a way that's probably conducive to building possession and maybe moving the opposition's block about before you try to score. The opposition team that are playing with the back 3, and one of the reasons we've experimented with the back 3 quite a bit this season, or some coaches have chosen to experiment with the back 3 this season, is because we're seeing a lot more goals scored from, I guess, what the kind of purists and the hipsters call the half space. So the kind of area typically between where the fullback and the centre back would be. And we're starting to find that if you put 3 centre halves in, your outside centre halves typically occupy what people would call that half space, which perhaps makes it more difficult for people to expose that space, or they've at least got to move you about a little bit more to be able to get in there. So the team that's practicing with the back 3, with a man less, would probably be defending in their own half more of the time. And we would just say, when you regain it, try and score as quickly as you possibly can on the counter-attack. So that says the team that are building, looking to get loads and loads of opportunity to maintain possession in the opposition's half, but are likely to be exposed in the counter-attack if that's likely. The team that are practicing with the back 3 are both practicing protecting the half space. The opposition, the team that are looking to control possession, are looking to move the opposition about to try and expose those particular areas, and rewarded for scoring in that way. Then it's probably important to overlay the individual stuff into that. So we'd consider if players have got more of a controlling possession target, that they may spend more of the time in that particular practice plan for the team of 10. They're probably going to see more of the ball all of the time. Those that have perhaps got targets around patience in defence, about being disciplined in their defending, about being aggressive near their own goal, it may be that they spend a greater degree of time playing in the team that are with the 9 and that are perhaps going to spend more of the time out of possession. And then specifically, if you get into some of the psych elements, one of our age groups has got a highly talented midfielder who can get quite frustrated when he doesn't see a lot of the ball and when things don't go well. He may play in the midfield 2 against the midfield 3, so he's going to see less of the ball. He's probably going to find it hard as a consequence of being outnumbered, and then both himself and the coaches need to support him to manage his frustration when he's in that moment. And I guess kind of similar to Owen, to finish, we're kind of keen on we don't have any wasted practices. We generally try not to run any just generic possession practice unless there's a rationale that sits behind it. So we maximise every moment as much as possible, spend as long in a single practice as possible. I guess kind of a lot of my early coach education experiences led me towards technique for 20 minutes, skill practice for 20 minutes, game for 20 minutes. And you often found yourself soaking up time, moving from practice to practice, really drilling stuff in the 20 minutes to try and affect learning, rather than spend 60 minutes in one practice and continually layering in additional elements that might support those things to occur. I think that's it.
Yeah. No, thank you, Ben. Yeah, there is a lot there, and that's what I like. I like the fact, from yourself and Owen, what's clear is that there is purpose behind what you're doing, and you're able to justify what you're doing and how you do it. And I think that's certainly something that we can all take away. If we were asked that question about, our session design, can we articulate it as clearly as that, whatever our context is? So thank you very much. And I certainly think, it's, a light bulb moment when I saw, that article of yours in the boot room, is the way that you look at constraints in terms of restrict, relate and reward. I think that's a really useful framework for people to start thinking about. That's great. Right, Warren, as a coach developer in Australia, I wonder if you can summarise for us and the rest of the world who are here today, what are the main messages that we want coaches to take away from coach education, particularly around this area of structure of sessions?
Yeah, I guess we see it as our job to ensure we take coaches on a journey whereby at the end of a course, regardless of whether it's a CB or an A, they're able to apply a process. And if we here in Australia take the example of our coach expertise model, where you have football knowledge, and then you have a vision and philosophy. So if you have a vision and philosophy at the top, some coaches coming in at the entry level may not even know what a vision and philosophy is, how they actually see the game being played, regardless of what stage of development they're actually coaching in. And then underneath that, the football knowledge might be very, very high, or it might be very, very low, depending on what level they're coming in at and depending on what course. And then if you take the three pillars in between training, match and management and apply that as a cycle, that's the sort of journey we want to take coaches on, and noting that some may be very, very strong in one pillar, some might have fantastic football knowledge but not able to actually bring it to life out on the training park. So if we just look at the two pillars, training and match, that's where we want, certainly from a session design point of view, to actually look at the match. From the match, the analysis that you do through your glasses or your lens, and then just coming up with, from that, how do you then take that onto the training park? And if you're looking for a session objective or an opportunity to improve something in an area, and then just going through that, it is certainly what we want to do with our coaches, and for them to be flexible with that as well. So going through a planning, prepare, bring it to life when you conduct it, but most importantly, to go through the evaluation of that as well. And certainly here we have a playing style statement where we want our players, from a national point of view, to play a proactive brand of football. We want them to be effective. We want them to be creative. Defensively, we want them to be able to work cohesively as a unit, in transition, intelligently, and collective press as well. And then from that, if you take just the 5 W's approach of why you're doing what you're doing, what and where on the field is it, and who and when's actually going to do that for you, and then bring that together and stitch that together to bring it into what we consider as the 4 core components. And just to touch on what Owen said before, is that if you do have limited time with your players in your environment that you're working at, you want to try and maximize the opportunity for the players or give them the best opportunity to modify their behavior in the environment that you're working in. So that clear chain of learning between each of the components, a passing practice going into a positioning game into a game training, and then finishing off to actually see whether you have actually modified player behavior in the training game at the end, and just stepping back. But that chain of learning is very, very important to us. But the crux of the training will actually be done in the game training component. That's where you're going to do the majority of the teaching. But if you can get a clear link to the session objective from the very beginning of the session all the way through to the end, and applying that process all the way through, that's probably the short version of what we try to achieve with our coach development courses here in Australia.
Thanks, Warren, and you're leading me nicely into asking a question about planning in a second. But it's clear there that the session design, in order to do that effectively, you need to have a clear idea of how you want your team to play, and that's come through clearly from all three of you. Thank you. But back to you, Owen. I'd like to ask the question about planning, because some of us might do our planning as we're driving to the session, or as the players arrive. That might happen sometimes. I'm guessing that doesn't happen at national team level, unless it's the Mike Bassett film, perhaps. But so I'm guessing that doesn't happen at national team level. So, can you give us an insight into, what does the planning process involve at that level, and who does it involve? What's it based on, and how long does that process and that preparation take, when you've already said you don't get a lot of opportunities and time with the players?
Well, yeah, there's no excuse for not being prepared in terms of working with a national team, because from the day that fixtures announced to that first training session, it might be 2 months, a minimum of 2 months, that you've got to prepare the activities that you're going to do with the players. So the challenge around it is how much detail you delve into. So our first step that we do will be around creating analysis of the opposition. So we'll create a dossier analysis on the opposition, as well as adding and evolving our one based on our observations of ourselves and the opposition over the past couple of years. And then from there, a second point will be, we'll create a team model for the fixture, for the match that we're going to play. And the team model will be solely deep-rooted, embedded in our playing philosophy. So we don't change a great deal from what we feel is true and the way in which we should play football. However, the team model will adapt slightly based on what we've observed in the analysis of the opposition, and that will be to do with how we feel we can score goals against them and how we can prevent them from scoring goals. And then from there, you'll get your third point of creating your key objectives that you want to get across at certain points before the game. So it's not just on the training pitch, but it's also in presentations, it's in around the Sabutio board, like I mentioned before. Lots of different ways of surrounding players with the knowledge and information that they need before they take to the pitch. And a previous Ferns coach, Tony Reddings, that I was fortunate to work under, highly recommend getting him on the podcast. Is around coaches being the master of exclusion. So basically, there's so much data and there's so much knowledge and so much research and analysis that you can do on the opposition. It's about really being the masters of exclusion and being a sculptor. So you sculpt away all the stuff that actually isn't going to impact performance as much. And you're left with the rocks, you're left with the actual detail that is going to impact performance the greatest. So we'll then take that information, those few key rocks, and think, how best are we going to transfer this information from us to the players? So like I've mentioned, we'll use a myriad of ways in order to get that information across. Once we've planned that, and this is as a technical staff with our analysts, once we've planned that, we will then get the whole staff together, including sports science, including logistics teams manager and things like that, to ensure that the program that we've got for the week or the 2 weeks that are away in camp will facilitate the learning that needs to take place. So we can't do a whole group presentation if we haven't got the meeting room booked out. We need to know from the sports science what physical levels the players are coming into to determine what our practices might look like on the pitch. So once we meet with the staff, we'll then plan the program for the couple of weeks, and then we'll plan the learning activities within that on the pitch and off the pitch. So then the last couple of things that we'll do, and one, we're in a fortunate position when you have 2 months between meals, is we've got the opportunity to test the practices. So we've got an under-18s group in Auckland. That's the next bunch of Ferns potentially that we have training on a weekly basis. So some of the practices that we deliver to the Ferns for the first time, it's actually the 5th, 6th time that as a coaching staff, we've delivered it. Because we can't do our learning when we're away with the Ferns. We only have those 2 practices before a game. So we can't afford for the area size to be too big or the objective to be too out of reach for the players that are involved. So we plan, we do, we prepare, we review, and with our group, our domestic group, so that by the time we go into working with the Ferns, it's as slick as it can possibly be. And then once we've got that nailed, we'll plan for the contingencies. So we've been to host countries where they've told us when we turned up on the training pitch that we've only got 60 minutes instead of 90. We've had tours where we've had 5 players out injured. So what are the contingencies? What are the what ifs that may go wrong during the practice? And what is going to be the framework that we put in place to ensure that it alleviates some of the damage that can be done, and we're able to have a planned action as opposed to dealing with things off the cuff. So that's kind of the process that we'll go through all the way through, from analysing the opposition all the way through to contingencies for what may go wrong.
Thank you very much, and that's a fascinating insight into the preparation of national team training. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I suppose similarly, Ben, I'd like to get an insight now into Fulham's academy. And I suppose, you know, if I spent a period of time there, I'm wondering, you know, what in terms of the coaching session structure or session design, I'm wondering what similarities would we see, for example, observing an under-10s coaching session to an under-16s coaching session, and maybe some of the differences, if there are any, between those?
I guess principally they'd be similar. Practically, they'd play out very differently. I guess we have kind of 3 pillars that we encourage the coaches to think about in their planning. 5 moments of the game, what we call impact, which is, I guess, is our kind of commitment to individualise the player development experience. And then class, which is kind of effectively just a full and holistic whole human development process. So C stands for character, which is, I guess, a psychological element. L stands for learner, which is effectively your sort of a tactical element. A for ability, which is your technical component. The first S is for speed, which is effectively your physical component, and the final S is for success, which I guess is kind of your more target-focused process. We encourage coaches to design an environment that combines either all or some of the moments of the game with the perceived and understood needs of the individual players across class. And that isn't necessarily just about training sessions or training programs, because I guess in a different way, perhaps from Owen, where when they play their games, whenever it is, they probably have to win. It's performance-based. Our games program, typically within the schoolboy program, is still effectively a training experience. So it might be that coaches are making different and conscious decisions about the type of environment that they expose the players to on a match day that enables them to combine particular elements of the moments of the game with the individual needs and with the, I guess, the consideration across class, which I guess the English FA would have traditionally called the 4 corners. I guess probably important there, I think Nick Levitt's asked a decent question down the side about the degree to which the kind of players are involved in those decision-making processes. I guess probably it depends upon what you value. I guess fundamentally they're not necessarily involved in sitting down and writing the stuff on the paper unless that's something that's perceived to be important. But I guess if we value the view of the players, we probably need to be involved with that in absolutely everything that we do. And that will be formal 6 weekly reviews where we speak with the players and their parents about how things are going and the things that they might do. There'll be ongoing informal conversations about the things that we glean from discussing that with the players. And the deeper and broader understanding becomes of the players that are in our care, hopefully, the more we're attuning what it is that we're doing to the perceived needs of those players. And I guess trying to find that balance between what players and parents tell you that they want, and I guess the coach's experience and skill about the degree to which they can blend that with the perceptions about what the player needs.
Thank you. And to pick coaches out of the air, please do use that chat function to ask questions. We will be coming back later, and Chris and Drew are keeping an eye on that, and we will definitely be selecting some questions from that to ask our panel as we move on. And look, I'm going to ask Warren one final question, then I think we'll move into we'll move into breakout rooms pretty soon, and then we'll come back and continue the interview as we go. So Warren, and I'm going to try and limit you to, as we said, maybe 3 minutes. I've failed on that so far, but we'll see how we go. So Warren, it's quite a nice summary question, actually, really. I mean, are you able to sort of summarise from your own personal experience how, over time, your own approach to designing coaching sessions has changed as you've become more experienced?
Yeah, 100%. It's been a journey, and it's evolved as time's gone on. And I think personally for myself, it's been about understanding the actual stage of development you're working in. And that provides the context of how you're actually going to plan and prepare your sessions and then cater to the needs of the individuals within that session. And that doesn't matter whether you're working in senior football or in youth football, but taking myself through that process. And currently, and having worked with Drew in more recent times, and taking it back to Nick Levitt's question on the side, is that we provide a supplementary programs where the players will actually, youth players from 13s to 16s will actually train with their club and play with their club. We'll provide a supplementary program for them where they'll come in once a week, and they'll either be training 1 week or they'll be playing again the following week. And then what we try to do there is to actually try to develop the individual and for them to understand what they need to improve on as individuals, and actually try and tailor our training sessions to support them as part of that journey. So an example being that in the training environment, if we're working on we try to keep this actual structure of the session quite similar. We might just use the passing component and then going into positioning games, but we'll have goals in every part of the practice to give it that direction, and that's evolved through time. And then what we'll do is an example, as I say, would be if we're working in particular with a holding 6, and we find that 6 is very, very comfortable on the ball and being able to actually spray passes left and right, but when they're under no pressure, we might just change that around where we'll actually put that holding 6 up against 2 more advanced midfield players to put him under more pressure, to then decide how to make decisions. So where the pressure's coming from, now the perception, decision making and execution have to decide where that's going to go to, and that might be the focus of that one particular session, just based on that individual needs, and then increasing the tempo and the intensity of that session. And you're able to do that with similar sort of practices, but tailoring it to the different positions on the park. But again, I think it's more about understanding the individuals within your own environment, and then how do you actually cater to the needs and wants of those individuals.
Thanks, Warren. All right, and that was only a bit over 3 minutes. You did well, mate. You did well. Look, we're going to try a few different things on this webinar, and we'll see how they go. But before we hand over and try and get more people involved, Chris and Drew, any sort of takeaways at the moment that you've sort of noted down? Any sort of key themes emerging?
I think, Gareth, there's definitely a bit there in the chat, and there's people looking on around that individualizing sessions, and also around what input players are having. So Ben touched on it there. Maybe a bit later on we can get Owen and Warren to also potentially add their thoughts, or even in one of the breakout rooms, about what degree of input players have into the design, and then also how the session might change on the run depending on player input back into the start.
Right. Yeah, cheers, Drew. How about you, Chris? I've got to unmute you. There you go, mate.
Is just to ensure that every single moment's utilised, and actually considering that in your planning stages, to that high level detail, to ensure that we aren't wasting any time, especially at grassroots level when you might be strapped for time. So just ensuring in your planning stages that you're knowing how your session's going to flow from one aspect to the other.
Yeah, that's good. And those two messages are, as far as I can see, are relevant regardless of whether we're a national team coach or the under-9s coach. So, yeah, good. We'll try and pick up some of those pieces as we go. Okay, right. The next thing we're going to try is we're going to try these breakout rooms, because we're very keen that whilst it's really important that we listen to our panel, and we will come back and do that, we also listen to each other and share ideas and relate what Owen, Ben and Warren have been talking about to our own context. So if this works, this is what will happen. In a minute, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. We're aiming for roughly about 5 coaches in each room. And I suppose there are a few bits of process that will make this work. The purpose is that you talk to other coaches and share your thoughts on what's been discussed. So when you get in there, if you turn on your camera and your mics, it's easier to discuss with people if you can see their faces. Be open with each other. Listen to each other. The more conversation that you have, the more you'll get out of these rooms. Some of us might be coming in and out of your room. Don't worry. Don't stop talking. We'll be in there trying to steal as many of your good ideas as possible and try to get a flavour of the conversation. Towards the end of the time, and I think I can put a message where you'll know where sort of time's running out, try to use the chat function, maybe put one thing that around session design that you're going to continue to do, and maybe one thing that you might be thinking about a bit more when we go back to coaching. Okay, so I suppose let's try to keep our conversations around some of the themes that have been mentioned. But if you find you go off track, I think that's absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm going to attempt this now, and luckily we've got about 100 people, which should help my maths a little bit. We'll see how we get on. Oh, look, thank you for that. I had a bit of admin to do, so I couldn't get into rooms. There were people dropping in and out of rooms, and I was trying to fight fires as we were going there. But hopefully, what I hope happened in those breakout rooms is people were were talking to each other and sharing their own ideas on what they do in their context. And it may be that we will need to do that 2 or 3 times for people to get used to that. But I think it's a good idea, and hopefully that will be useful as we go. Okay, well, look, I know there were some questions already in the chat room, and I know I've had Chris and Drew monitoring those. So I'm actually going to hand over to Chris and Drew and see if they could, on the behalf of the coaches here, pose questions to either all panel members for a quick answer, or maybe one panel member for a slightly longer answer. Chris, Drew, over to you, boys.
Just unmute myself. I'll go in. So Warren, we got one for you from Oscar, but again, maybe relevant to all, is that how do you fit maybe fitness and conditioning elements into your session design?
Again, it would go back to that stage of development, I guess. If I was to take it and relate it to a sub-elite environment here in New South Wales in the National Premier Leagues with the seniors here, ordinarily a Wednesday night would be our football conditioning night. Again, we won't sacrifice the football just for fitness. We'll actually incorporate the fitness into the football and make it specific to what we want to do, to still try and get those key messages out of what we want to achieve at the weekend. So if you take the past, present and future approach based on what we did at the weekend, going into what we're going to do the following weekend and that bit in between, we would tailor all of our sessions to include exactly how we were going to play, and depending on where we were in our cycle, we very much would follow a football conditioning program, whereby it would be depending on what week we're in, small, medium or big games, and work our way through. But it would never be at the sacrifice. We wouldn't sacrifice football just for fitness. We'd always include the fitness into the football sessions. And then in a youth space, it would be very, very similar as well, and that we wouldn't have a designated fitness night per se, but we were able to tailor our sessions in a way by we could increase the intensity or decrease the intensity depending on where we are in our training cycle, by getting to help players as individuals to get fit, but get fit for football.
Thanks, Warren. Owen and Ben, anything particular to add on that? Or if not, I'm happy to throw across to Drew for another question.
Carry on.
Go on, Drew.
All right. So I might come back to the one that Nick Levitt threw in earlier to Ben, and then apply it maybe to you in that different context. So to what degree do the players have input into maybe what your session design looks like, or what the session flow looks like once it is in flow?
Yeah, so with the Ferns, the process that I outlined all the way through from the analysis, they'll be involved in different stages. So definitely some of the players that have been around for, that have accrued a decent number of caps, will be involved in that first analysis piece, because they've got a lot of anecdotal first-hand experience of the opposition that we're going to face, and some of the areas that they felt that we were able to capitalize on the opposition, as well as where we got hurt in the past. So they're involved in that initial analysis piece and the setting of the objectives. Then as we go through, it's kind of been an ongoing piece as to how they support session design. So yes, they may be involved in helping design practices, but more around the feedback that they give. So more in the way in which we review the practices help inform our design going forward in the future. So for example, we may have 11v11 practices that we've had in the past, which, because of physical loading, needs to be low, maybe more intervention for player learning than actual playing time than what they might be used to in a Wednesday at their club, for example. So based on feedback from players, we have energizers. So we have kind of like 4 or 5 minute energizers. So little areas on the side of the pitch, which are more general. We can still theme them based around the overall objective, but they are a little bit more general, where players are able to go for 4 or 5 minutes, lots of touches on the ball, lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm, and before they come back into the practice, which has to be of a lower intensity for them to be prepared for the game. That doesn't mean that the 11v11 aren't also full of energy and full of enthusiasm and enjoyment as well. It just means where we have to keep it low. But there's an example of receiving player feedback to help inform the way in which we design our practices.
And
Chris.
Just got another one here again for all. It's around the challenge for grassroots coaches is often space when it comes to sessions. What sort of one piece of advice would you give everyone around still being able to run an effective session, maybe in a limited area when it comes to grassroots land?
I'll give an answer to start off with. Yeah, it's definitely an aspect, a challenge that coaches have faced throughout all different standards of the game. So what we'll encourage our grassroots coaches is, can everyone be involved in some form of learning, whether they're taking part in the practice physically or whether they're set a task to observe somebody who is and provide a bit of feedback. So is there an opportunity to involve them in the practice, even though the space dictates that you might not be able to play within the area? So that's if safety is an issue. The other area where we'll try and challenge our coaches is when safety becomes an issue, an area is probably too small, but where there's lots of chaos, sometimes coaches can be a bit apprehensive and a bit worried because it looks very messy what's going on in a small area. We encourage that. We encourage that chaos. We feel like a lot of what Warren mentioned earlier on around perceiving what's around you and decision making and things like that, that's related to football, can go on within that chaos. So we'll challenge people to work in small spaces with decent numbers of players, as long as safety doesn't become an issue.
Just to add to that, obviously, the reality is the majority of coaches, certainly at grassroots level, will be coaching on the postage stamp. And from a design point of view, if you can try and design your sessions inside to out, so if you know the specific area that you're actually going to be working with, whether it be a 30 by 40 or a 60 by 40, wherever it may be, but you actually design your session in a way that you only ever have to pick cones or markers up, never put anything down. As a luxury, we've always seen it in the past where coaches want to set up practice 1 and then go next door and practice 2, but the reality is you might not have that space to do it. But if you can be clever with your actual session design and actually build it within the biggest part of the session you're going to have, which you're hoping is going to be the game at the end, where you get to see whether behavior has been modified through what you've done in the other parts of your session, but just design your session from inside to out, where you're only ever taking cones away, not putting other cones down.
Yeah, thank you, Warren. Look, I know Ben's out to shoot off, and our plan was to keep this to an hour. We're going over a little bit. Owen, are you okay for another 5 minutes if we take one more question?
As long as everyone else is all right dealing with me for 5 minutes.
Brilliant. Drew, have we got one more question, please?
Yeah. So there's one here in terms of, all right, so across different environments, that's probably to both Warren and Owen. So with things like access to analysis, video analysis, and then fitness, psychological needs of players, technical needs of players, etc., in different environments, how do you sort of balance giving the players everything that you as a coach feel like they need with making sure that you don't overload them and it actually becomes you giving them what you perceive they need as opposed to what the players are actually able to deal with, different ages and stages, maybe, Owen?
So yeah, I think the key thing that you've identified is what do the players need, and also an element of that is what do the players want and believe in. So before we move into designing really specific practices for teams or individual development, we need to have a clear understanding of who the players are in front of us, who we are ourselves, and how do we operate the best as a coaching staff as well. So what do the players respond to? How do the players best learn? And what environments do they best operate within? And as soon as we've got a clear understanding of that, only then can you design practices that are going to meet the needs of the individual and the group as a whole. So my biggest advice into that is, before we rush into what do we need, how much information do we need to give, how do we make sure we don't overload the information, is get to know your players. Get to know them through formal opportunities, through 360 reviews. Get to know them through informal chats on the way to training. all these different methods that, to be honest, I only started to cover on my when I did an A license course. And I'm of the opinion, and what we're going to look to put in place is it should be the first thing that everyone deals with. Who are you? Who are your players? And then you can start to structure learning appropriately.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. And if I go back to the original question that was posed to myself by Gareth and that coach expertise model and the manage self, manage others pillar, if you don't know yourself, it's going to be incredibly difficult to manage others. But knowing what the needs and the wants of the environment that you're actually working in, and then providing a framework to support those players as individuals, but without knowing who they are and noting that everyone learns differently, you're not going to be able to cater their needs. So getting to know them as quickly as possible is going to be incredibly important to just see how successful or unsuccessful you're going to be as part of that overall environment as a coach for them.
Thank you, guys. Look, I know we could go all night asking questions, but, someone's already said to me, once football coaches start talking football, that we're not going to stop. But we do have to respect the time of people that have tuned in. So I'm just going to sum up a couple of things, really, kind of what's happening next. I've had a lot of emails about, whether there's going to be a recording, etc. So I'm just going to try and share my screen again and just move on the slide. Let's see if I can do that. Okay. Now, Warren, can you see a slide with In the Technical Area podcast on there? Yep, cool. So I said they were allowed 3 plugs. They had one at the beginning. Their second plug is the fact they're all wearing their merchandise. I've noticed that halfway through. But it's in all jokes aside, 3 guys here, Warren, Drew and Chris, have just launched an excellent podcast called In the Technical Area. I think about 4 episodes down, 5 if you include the pilot, and I know there's a lot more to come. So if you haven't already subscribed through your usual podcast means, then please do so. Chris, if I've missed anything, you've got 10 seconds to add any information about your podcast, which is genuinely excellent.
No, that's spot on, and thanks for sharing. And if you do listen, or if you are going to plan to listen, please do get in touch and provide some thoughts and feedback on it, because we're always looking to grow and develop as coaches. Thank you.
And next week, we'll be back here next week, a couple of hours later. But hopefully you can see how we're trying to maintain the quality that we've set today. We're going to specifically look at keeping players playing the game. We know that there is a participation cliff, unfortunately. In Australia, it's around 11 and 12 for boys and 15, 16 for girls, and how can we keep players playing this game that we love? And we're very grateful that we've got Robin Russell, football development consultant at UEFA, joining us, and the excellent Jack Walton, coach development manager at the Football Association, joining us, and our very own Chris Adams will be forming the 3rd member of that panel. What will happen is probably tomorrow we will post details of how to register. It will be the same sort of system as for this one. So please keep an eye out for the hashtag Monday Night CC. I will be putting it on my Twitter. It will be on LinkedIn, Facebook. We will try to send an email to everybody, but please, it may be released before that. And we are limited to 300 coaches. And we although we're not charging, we sold out in 2 days last time. So I had to send lots of emails to people saying that they couldn't take part today. So get on that one early. I've had a look at and also, use the hashtag Monday Night CC yourself as well. If it's good, if it's positive stuff, put it on social media. If you've got any suggestions on how we can improve, then I think everyone got my email address in the confirmation email. So any criticisms, please email those to direct. Any praise, share it far and wide.